district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
All right, what is up, Fantasy Land? Welcome to the GOAT District. We have a special GOAT District Monday night performance, along with a special guest, one of my favorites to get on every year. Love having him on pre-draft. We're going to try to get him on post-draft as well, just to get all his insights sometime probably later this spring, early this summer, and find out what's going on. But Theo, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I was just looking at the draft we drafted last night. Dan and I split an entry in the first NFFC RotoWire online championship, and I like our build a lot. It was good, and we're also in a startup draft we were just talking about. So everything's busy this week. I'm stoked to get Jordan on. Right before the draft, it's going to be an awesome show tonight. Excited to get his takes on some of these rookies. And I'm really excited for the draft to just happen. We've been talking about it for months, and I'm ready for it to drop. How you doing tonight, Jordan?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me. It'd be nice if I could, figure out how to turn the mic on. But other than that, I'm doing great. How are you guys? I'm glad to, of course, to be back and good to see you guys.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So yeah, we're excited because Jordan, he is one of, I think, the best dynasty minds out there. Put a lot of effort into it, a lot of research. I'm going to let him plug his analytics at Dynasty, but before I do that, I just want to say, this is something that I always get his book every year. It's packed with great information. It's just really good reading. Even if you think you know a lot about it, it's just really good reminders, and it makes you think about some things in a new way. But Jordan, why don't you tell them a little bit about the analytics of Dynasty and what you got going on there?
Yeah, so Analytics of Dynasty 2022 edition. Lots of new stuff, and a lot of it's team building. And we were talking about this before the show, and it's some stuff that we're going to incorporate a little bit, I think, in the I don't know, Dan, every time we get together, we have this big like multi-page show sheet, and we rip it up by paragraph 2. So we'll see if we get to this. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but we were talking about how we value whether it's future picks or current picks versus future classes, and all that stuff. A lot of the stuff that I've learned over the AOD 2022 edition, which would have been the last year of writing and putting it together, has been using those picks in different ways that I think have been untapped potential. And in the way I build teams and the way I sort of go about my team building and trying to build high upside teams, it has really changed. And I think that this will be an interesting rookie class to see if I could sort of put some of that stuff into play. But a lot of the lessons that I've learned, I always joke AOD is all about me teaching you about all the things I failed about, because I always look at all the mistakes that I made along the way. And as a result, I come back and I say, here's what if I had known this, I wouldn't have done that. Right. If I had known this sort of data stuff, I wouldn't have made this mistake. And it's about applying that going forward. And this year, it's been, I think, pretty profitable and high upside. And, the subscribers have done really well with a lot of stuff that we've written. So I'm super excited about this book. It's different than anything we've really written before.
Yeah. It's really good stuff. I'm about probably 2/3 of the way through it right now. And it's just been great. So I've been super stoked to get you on and just be able to talk about Dynasty theory and everything. And it's really good too, because we had Scott Connor on last week, who's also an excellent Dynasty theorist. You and he kind of go about things a little bit of a different way, but I think, you both have a lot of good insights, and, there's great things to be learned from both of you. So,
yeah, it's funny you say what part of the book you're at. Like the last 40 pages, if I could can something, put it in a thing, and just like, that's the stuff that will make you better. Like all of it'll help you, but that's the stuff that'll move the needle big time. The last 40 pages in terms of the hierarchy of assets and the confessions of a recovering productive struggler. Like that's the stuff that has been absolutely the most fun to write, and I think absolutely the most meaningful to write for people that are actually building dynasty teams that want to win.
Awesome. So you're making me want to dive in and get done with that part too. So
yeah. I got to send my yearly retainer out to you. You do this really nice intro of me, none of which is true, and then and I have to send my yearly check to have it delivered to Dan's house.
The main thing I'm trying to do is make sure that we can keep getting you for free, and you don't start charging those appearance fees.
Kidding? I got to do it to pay for my hype man here. It's
That's right.
No doubt.
Yep. All right. So anyway, before we start, though, I want to do a quick plug for the FFPC. Couple things going on at the FFPC. They are, once the NFL draft is over, you're going to be able to get into their best ball tournament. It's going to be about twice as big as the last best ball tournament. The first place is going to be twice as much, 200,000 instead of 100,000. It's going to have, I guess, roughly twice as many entries. And that was a super fun tournament. $125 to enter. A lot of people really had a fun time with that. And the nice thing about it is the way that you advance through the tourney, where you keep, they keep taking like the top 3, top 4, and putting them into new leagues. So you're not, you don't have to be like, necessarily first. You just need to be top 3 in your league each week to advance once you get into the final stage of it, up until you get into the final week. And then the other tournament that you'll definitely want to get into is the Football Players Championship, $500,000 grand prize, $500,000, definitely worth getting in. And it's only $350 to enter. You can buy a 3-pack for $1,000. And right now they have an early bird promo where you can get a $35 FFPC league credit for each time you enter the Football Guys Players Championship, maximum of 3. So you can earn, you can do a $1,000 pack, and you can get $105 of that back with league credit, so that you're really only spending $905, or $895. So that's a huge, nice deal too. Good thing to take advantage of. And of course, we have the FFPC main event. That's their flagship tournament, and a whopping $1 million prize going there. So make sure you take a look at that, sign up for that as well. And then last but not least, we're focusing on Dynasty, so we got to talk about the FFPC Dynasty teams. Their leagues have never had a team or a league fold. That's an incredible. They've got hundreds of leagues, Theo. Just hundreds.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
It's the best. This time of year, especially doing those startups before the NFL draft, it's a lot of fun. And really, cleaning up your dynasty rosters this time of year, getting ready for our rookie drafts. Nothing better than FFPC Dynasty.
Right. And you can get in for as little as $77. You can go up to, right now they have new leagues open for up to $1,250. So somewhere in there, I think you can probably find your price point and give it a try. It's a ton of fun for sure. So since we are talking about Dynasty, let's get into talking a little bit with Jordan. And let me just fire off the first question and say, what's your pre-draft strategy right now for your portfolio of teams? How many teams do you have, first off, roughly? I hate to ask that, especially if your wife is in earshot. You could just wave me off on that.
It's like Fight Club, Dan. It's like Fight Club. You don't have to answer this one, Jordan.
No, I'll answer it. I think I have between 25 and 30. I think it's 27 at present. I have a couple of home leagues and stuff too that I don't count in that true dynasty number. But yeah, no, I tell my wife, I show her the balance sheet of the leagues and stuff. She's okay with it. But no, I get that some people have some sensitivity to that. But a lot of my process in terms of this is it's almost a bit at this point for me, but I wait and talk about rookies as late as you'll find as anyone in Dynasty. And the reason for that is, again, it's part bit, but the other part is true, is that like, I'll cram like double podcasts into days and stuff. Like, we'll do plenty of rookie content, but I don't want to spend like January through St. Patrick's Day talking about rookies, because there's so much value in using, whether it's later picks or identifying veteran situations that you can buy low on early. And that's stuff that will, if you spend a lot of that early time working on veterans, that is stuff that the market ends up figuring out or looking at or diving into when redraft season starts, right? Because what you'll see is the market in Dynasty will move. It will move towards, people will identify inefficiencies, will identify that other stuff. I flip it on its head and say, let's do the August stuff in January, because then we know what we're trying to get to. And you can use a lot of that time. I think that's really, really high leverage, and it's counter-cyclical, and that's a big thing. So for me, a lot of March into January or into April is just cramming this stuff because we were trying to leverage our bets early on in the calendar. So now for me, it's either I have basically a couple of plays. I'm either trying to move way up the board, right? I've made a couple of deals for 101 in my rookie drafts, or I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to try and trickle down the board. I don't want to be, a lot of the research from AOD kind of tells you that, listen, it's really hard to pick guys, and it's not, you're trying to pick classes of players. You're trying to emphasize, hey, we know that, first round rookie wide receivers who broke out early in college are better than guys that didn't break out, or are better than guys that broke out late, right? So you're trying to sort of hit that group and not necessarily pick the individual player in that group, right? So that's kind of my deal. A lot of the stuff that I try and do. So I try and leverage that, and that's again, how did we learn that, right? It was picking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, right? Because as I was sat there doing that, I said, this is a bad idea. And I liked Jalen Reagor, and I was actually probably ahead of the market on Justin Jefferson, not nearly high enough. But I said, I don't think there's a ton of difference here. And then when I went back and I looked, that suspicion was right. And there was a big gap in ADP. And when that happens, right, that's almost always an opportunity to bet on the later guy. So those are really the things that I'm looking for, kind of understanding players right now, taking players that and identifying like, hey, if this happens, right, I don't put together a pre-draft rookie board. I think of it now as like, if X happens, like this is how I'm going to respond to it, right? So if Jahan Dotson, a good one I think is, if Jahan Dotson's a first round wide receiver, how am I going to treat him? Right? Because that stuff you can think about in advance and kind of have an idea. And I actually go so far as to write it down. And then I'm not clouded by, hey, he landed with Kansas City, or hey, he landed with, Dallas, or hey, he landed with Tampa, or whatever, whoever it is. I'm not clouded by landing spot, but I kind of know how I want to think about that before it happens. Right? That's a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking about right now. And then trying to see what veterans I can get for discounts and rookie picks, right? Those are the things that I'm really doing right now, because I want to be able to exploit those things when I'm on the clock or when I'm in the middle of a draft.
How about ownership percentage? Are you tracking ownership percentage across your 20 leagues to make sure you're not too exposed to a particular player? And if so, is there a percentage you try to not go over?
It's funny you asked that. The answer to the question is yes, I do. I had it open. It's funny that you should ask that. I had it open. There isn't a number that I'm too scared of. So I will go I will own 100% of someone if I think the price is right. Typically, that's just very difficult to do that. And as I've gotten into more, like as I've played more, and whether that's acquiring, like I've gotten into a bunch of orphans that I just got really cheap that just make investment sense. So it has watered down some of my ownership percentages of players. But I've been up as, 60, 70% of guys at times. Right now, I'm basically at, I think my highest rostered guy, I'm just checking, is Alexander Madison at 52%. And at quarterback, I think it's Dak Prescott. Yeah, Dak Prescott at like 26%. So I'll go high. Again, like I think Stafford's undervalued. Like I'd feel fine pressing Stafford on every team. Like I wouldn't. It's tough to do that just because there's not a ton of liquidity in it. But I don't have a problem. Again, my player pool is narrower, especially a quarterback, than at other positions. So, like if I could figure out a way to get Mahomes in 100% of leagues, I'm fine doing that. Right, I'm fine. Right, I know that elite quarterbacks are the best bet to make. And if you want to win games, if you want to get buys, if you want to win championships, if you want to improve your odds, right, if you don't want to miss, right, go get an elite quarterback because it's the most predictable thing year over year. I would be fine taking 100% shot on Mahomes. I have no fear of too high leverage. The question then becomes is like, at some point there'll be value in trading them, right? Like at some point along the way, someone's going to offer you 180 cents on the dollar and you have to take, right? Like, but, and that's, I think, a different question, but sort of at market cost, a lot of times I will be way over. Like Stafford, I was just continue to invest all along the way just because I thought he was undervalued.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So I want to kind of go back to one thing on your, how you're doing your dynasty upside down and thinking about veterans early, because I think there's a lot to that. As Wheeler says, early best ball drafts really help identify those vets you can get at a value, which is a nice strategy that I use as well. But part of it too is like trying to figure out where you can, I think where people are overvaluing assets just because they've traditionally valued them high. Versus assets that may be undervalued just because they've traditionally valued them low. Like case in point, like take Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Leonard Fournette, and James Conner. What's the difference really at this point between those four assets?
Not a ton, and it's a lot of priors. Right. It's a lot of, and again, this is right. Like I'm fine being different, and I'm fine. I think there's a couple of ways you can play Dynasty. You can try and cater your teams to what everyone else thinks is interesting because you want to trade with them. Or you can take bets that other people don't think are interesting. And a lot of times that involves players that are undervalued. And a lot of times that undervalued in the sense of, they don't cost what they will produce or what you project them to produce. Put another way, you project them to outproduce their cost. Leonard Fournette has been that really for the last, 3, 4, at
least 3 years. Yeah.
Almost definitely his post. I would say even up till the year before he left Jacksonville, he's been undervalued. I mean, if we really were to go to put guys on a career start through 5, I don't even know what he is, 5-6 years, he's going to be in the elite percentile of that number. Like I haven't looked recently, but I know that's true, right? Because when you look, like I track rookies like wins over replacement, which is a metric that I use that basically just tells you how many games a player will use. And I think he was like 8th since I went back to like 2008. Right? Like, I mean, he has been an elite producer in terms of expectations. I ask myself a lot, like, what's the difference between him and Chubb? Right? It's several rounds of startup valuation, but is there that much difference? Because they're kind of on a 2-year deal. Like him and Connor are the same deal. The question that I would have is both of those spots, Fournette and Connor, have both been linked to rookie running backs. I should say Tampa Bay and Arizona, where they have been linked to rookie running backs. I study a lot of the website. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, grindingthemocks.com. I use it a ton. And I think it's really interesting just because it's it's addicting to go on and search. But one of the things that I do, and I wrote a whole series of Football Guys about it, which is a lot of that data will tell you like, hey, mocks are picking team X to be in on position Y, right? There's a ton of receiver to the Saints, right? That probably should impact how we think about Michael Thomas, for example, or running back to Atlanta, right? That should probably impact how we think about a guy like Cordell Patterson. But the odds aren't as high as you might think on that, right? So again, you start looking at these things. James Conner, if you look over the past couple months, which is really the most discreet way you can really search it, is to search March and January. They had a good percentage of mocks taking a running back. That's pre-James Conner being re-signed, right? So a good chunk of that is pre-James Conner being re-signed. So I think that number is probably lower than the market would suggest based on the mocks, right? So all that stuff is to say that when you start comparing those guys, I mean, that's the high value stuff in Dynasty, right? Because if you're like, hey, what's the difference? Like, for how long has Dalvin Cook been better than Leonard Fournette? If we're truly being honest about that, I don't know. 16 months? It's not. Yeah. I mean, not. I mean, if you start counting points,
right? Has he even been better other than 2020? I mean, 2020, you can say, yeah, he was definitely better then.
Right. But over their career, like if you were to just blind resume them, I don't. And I looked at it. I actually looked at it before last year, and so I know that the numbers from last year would actually shape towards Fournette. Right. But you start looking at these things, and you're like, well, what's if the market's valuing Cook a lot more than Fournette? Well, why is that, and why? And if I'm not. If my conclusion to that is, well, I can't be on Fournette because other people aren't on it, then you're playing into the wrong hands, right? The answer to me is like, all right, well, at that cost, Fournette's a smash, right? But people will say, well, I can't give up the startup value because other people are really interested in Dalvin Cook. I think that's by and large a flawed strategy,
right? And which I don't have it on the show sheet, but one thing you talk about a lot on your podcast with Chad Parsons is kind of having the two-way go, right? As far as your trades, and which lends itself to like if you have Dalvin Cook, Scott Kobe's asking, do you think we should be looking to trade Cook and Kamara? I'll let you answer that in a second. But my answer is an unqualified yes. It might even be almost bordering on too late to trade him, but I think you can still get some decent value. But for like if you wanted to make a pivot over to something equivalent, I mean, if you can trade Cook or Kamara for Fournette plus something, right. Whatever you get plus, I mean, that to me is a way to go. And I'll let you explain the concept of the two-way go there.
Yeah, so I just looked it up, by the way. Fournette, and if you go back, they've been in the league 5 years. So Fournette and Cook, 4 top 36 finishes, 3 top 24 finishes. Fournette has 3 top 12 finishes to 2 for Cook, and Cook has 2 top 6 compared to 1 for Fournette. So, and Fournette finished as basically their 2 best finishes. Fournette was 7-5, and Dalvin Cook was 6-2. But when you look at it, it's actually, I mean, Fournette crushed him out of the gate because he produced a top 10 finish. It wasn't really until year 4 of their career that Cook even put himself on par, and then I think he would have fallen off. So I think that question is really interesting. The two-way go. So I think I would look at this in a way of, are those guys overvalued? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. Right. If my goal is to win, I think this year being in on guys like Dalvin Cook, we track real draft position over at my site analytics at dynasty.com. Alvin Kamara is running back 13.5 in median ADP over the past month, right? Just about the top of the 6th round in terms of startup superflex drafts. Dalvin Cook, the top of the 5th round, basically. So about a round difference. They're basically sandwiching the running back 1-2 line there. The question becomes is like, all right, well, how much different are they from a guy like Gibson or Mixon who's ahead of them? Or how much different are they from a guy like Fournette, Montgomery, Zeke, right? Aaron Jones, right? You start looking down. I think running back tends to be a pivot down position, right?
Mhm.
So I tend to think that, you know, you could pivot down at wide receiver and at running back and sort of collect stuff along the way of that pivot, whether it's future picks, whether it's additional upgrades at quarterback or tight end, right? That's where I tend to borrow from, because I think our ability to get those things right is kind of tough, right? A lot of what happens at wide receiver is variance. A lot of what happens at running back is injury related, right? And that's stuff that we can't really control. So I tend to borrow from those positions by moving down and amping up what we do know, which is elite quarterbacks and elite tight ends matter a lot more than anything else, relative to their positions. And so that's this, there's a balance, a pulley system to it all. If you look, I'm kind of doing the mannequin dance a little bit here, right? Right. That's kind of what you start to see about these things. You have to borrow from one aspect to sort of address another. I think borrowing at running back, sliding down, and that could be from moving from Swift to Kamara plus, right? That could be for future rookie pick capital, right? And that's a two-way go, by the way, because Kamara is very easily could match, if not pass, a guy like Swift. And if you're picking up a first in the process of that, you've got the ability to beat it coming and going. I pulled off one where it was Najee Harris for, I believe it was Eckler and a first, right? Eckler at the time, the first thing I do in the spring, like the minute they come out, I sit down and I look at Mike Clay's projections, like from the beginning to the end of them. And the first thing I noticed was like some of the running back stuff. Eckler is projected ahead of Najee Harris. And so I was able to collect the 2023 first out of that. And so I said, all right, in the immediate term, I'm probably beating Najee Harris by having Eckler. And I've got the insulation and trump card down the line of having a first on top of that, right? So if my bet is wrong, I've got outs, right? And if my bet is right, I've got the ability to magnify it, right? So I think keeping your options open in that sense, and it's not just picks, it can be different positions and stuff like that, but leaving yourself options to win both now and later and to adjust, right? If you're wrong, I think that's a big thing. And that's a big focus of the last chapter of the book, honestly. That's stuff that I used to be like a long-term productive struggler. Now I'm much more like, let's leave myself a lot of options and we'll see, and I've been able to turn teams that didn't look to be very good into really good really quickly because things broke well for me and I had the liquid assets in hand to sort of magnify that edge.
Would you say that the two-way go, especially when you're dealing with some of these running back trades we're talking about, that the younger running back, we all want it, stud younger running backs on dynasty rosters, but do you think people overrate those assets? Like your Najee Harris, Austin Eckler trade is a classic example of that. Dan and I were in a draft last night, redraft. Eckler goes 4th overall. Najee goes 11th overall. Right. But they're overpaying for that age gap, which with running backs, it seems like that's maybe the most dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, and I look at the running back position really in levels of commitment. And we're in a period of time with the running back position where I don't know, like, again, I do this a lot. Like I study this stuff a lot. I write a book about it. I mean, I did 388 podcasts for AOD subscribers last year. Like I look at this stuff a lot. And one of the biggest uncertainties that I have is like, all right, what's happening in the running back market? Because Breece Hall probably should be a first round rookie pick, like in the NFL draft, like he probably should be. He's not. It doesn't look like. It's probably unlikely that he's going to be that. Why is that? Is it because the market is actually changing on rookies? Is it teams are learning this lesson? Or is it the flip side of that, which is that there's just a really good supply of running backs in the league right now. So you have the top, 45 running backs are really good right now. So you don't have a ton of teams out there saying, listen, I need a running back because, 1.5, 2 deep on most teams is actually pretty good. And it's better than it's probably been 5-10 years ago, right? Which one of those things is it, right? Is it that the teams are learning, or is it that the supply is really good? Because I think understanding those things is a big thing of like, how do we predict the running back future, right? If Najee Harris is good, but a couple years down the line, they're like, all right, we don't want to pay him, right? Is he playing a series of year-to-year contracts like Fournette has played? Is he playing a series of year-to-year contracts like Connor has played? And then all of a sudden what you realize, especially about running backs, is it's not the level of guys that have multiple year commitments. It's like less than 15 at any given time. And the guys that have more than 2 years of commitments, it's a handful at any time. And so if you're really, so in the situation like Harris and Eckler, for me, I'm looking at most of these decisions in a 2-year window, especially if I can get a pick attached to the back of that, because that'll allow me to play in a different window if I want to play there. But in the next 2-year window, I'm looking at, is Eckler better than Harris? He's about on par. So I'll take the Eckler side. And honestly, outside of that, it's really tough to predict. It just really is. And I think Eckler is a guy that could age well. And, Harris is an older first-round running back, right? So, again, I like Harris. But just when you're looking at this trade, I think there's a lot that goes on to it. I can't say with a lot of certitude which guy's going to be better over the next 36 months. So give me the pick, and I'll let someone else pay the tax for that choice.
Yep, absolutely. And so Scott, I have a trade on the screen. He has an offer of Fournette and Pitman for Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Pitman fan. And the other thing about, we talked about pivoting down at running back. I'll pivot down a wide receiver because, the Pitman range, there's so many guys. There's between wide receiver 15 and 40. You could sort those guys one minute, go have a cup of coffee, resort them another, and be like, they both equally look pretty good. And they could have been randomly generated. I think you come back to it and you're like, that's tough to really argue with that, and you could do that 3 or 4 times, and it's really tough. And I could make an argument for a lot of those guys over other ones, and the next sentence make totally different arguments. I just think it's really hard to sort of hit that range of the position. So that would just be my caveat about Pitman. I do like Fournette. I would look to make an upgrade. I wouldn't probably do this way. I would look to make this an upgrade at tight end, or an upgrade at quarterback, or an upgrade at a pick, or make a real jump at wide receiver. Go from Pitman to Diggs, right? Do that type of jump, other than just to add Pitman in, because honestly, Pittman's better than whoever you would cut for sure in this scenario. I think Pittman's pretty good, but is he a difference maker, right? And that's the only thing I really care about, is guys really making a difference. And I'm not sure how he does that. And then you get to where it's becoming much more of a challenge trade between him and Cook. I would structure this one a little bit different. Go from Njoku to Goddard, right? That's a deal where you're really taking a chunk out of that Cook cost and placing it at a spot that's really got some difference making upside for you. That's just an example.
All right, there you go. So a lot of different concepts there. And while we're on it, make sure you guys are hitting that like button. Anytime you're watching the YouTube, it just helps us out so much. If you look right down between Theo and Jordan, right down below them, you'll find that like button. Just go ahead and give that a press. It's really easy. See there, you did it. It didn't take hardly any effort at all, and it really helps us out a ton. So thanks for that. And moving on, what are some common mistakes, Jordan, that you're seeing Dynasty managers making at this time of year specifically?
Betting on certainty. I think people very certain bets. I'll never again trade up for a first-round wide receiver, in the first round of rookie draft. I will absolutely never do that again. I think it's a terrible bet. That's a common example of a problem I think that's happening at this time. I think people value longevity in rookie drafts more than they should value just, I don't know if you want to call it getting on the board, or just not whiffing, right? We think about, it's really important to have longevity. I think it's really important to just not whiff, right? There's a big difference there in terms of on the top 10% of running backs, the top 10% of wide receivers, who outproduces? Well, it depends how you measure it. But probably wide receivers might give you an extra half, or maybe an extra top 24 season. If you're just looking at the elite guys, but it's actually at that range, it's running backs that their hits are more meaningful. Right. And so you start having these debates about longevity is really important. Man, again, we just talked about a bunch of reasons why I like it's really tough to project longevity. Like if you look in hindsight, you'll see guys that had a ton of longevity and you're like, wow, they were really impactful. And that's true. But trying to predict which ones those are, it can be a lot tougher than we think. And especially in rookie drafts. So I tend to look at it from the opposite way of like, not what's going to give me longevity, but hey, what's going to be functional? And then I can sort of pivot. And as I've sort of looked at this, I think I would have been a little bit less likely to do this in prior years. But one of the things that I found in AOD is we can tell a lot about a wide receiver after the first year. And I think that that's incredibly valuable, especially if we sort of, and there's a lot of data that suggests that wide receivers are insulated in terms of their value from year 1 to year 2. So you might not get all of what you paid for them, but it'll stay in the same ballpark-ish. And you can make a pivot off of that, and you're not going to take a big loss. Where on a guy like Trey Sermon, you took a big loss. I took a big loss. So I think that's one thing that I've kind of learned is like, okay, you can sort of look at that, and then we can have a really good idea after year 1 if someone's going to be good or not. Generally speaking, like the numbers, and I put this in AOD, a lot of the yards per route run stuff. You can just look at that and have an idea of if a player's going to be any good or not, right? Because if they didn't stick out, they're probably not very good. Their odds of them being a big time difference maker are very low if they don't stick out as a rookie. And so we know that, and we can make pivots. So that's another thing I'm trying to incorporate more and more in my process, which is like, all right, yeah, we can I'm trying not to whiff and not to just like lose and hemorrhage values, but also at the same time balancing that against like, hey, even if like this guy might be necessarily a little bit lower of a odds bet, I know exactly how to treat him. Right. Which is, I think, a different thing, it's a little bit different of a question. Right. So I'm balancing some of that stuff as I'm trying to get better at dynasty drafts and thinking about them in different ways. A lot of it was like, all right, if you want to make the best production bet, like that's a really, like, I could tell you how to do that. It's draft running backs over wide receivers. If you want to sort of figure out a way to make maybe a little bit more nuanced, like, all right, I want some more optionality. There's some stuff there that you could sort of say, all right, there's some specific spots that you could look at and say specifically at certain price points, wide receiver might be better than running back, but I would be careful about doing that in mass. So generally I would say my advice is running back over wide receiver at the same cost in rookie drafts. Although I think that there might be more exceptions that we'll find along the way.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. I think one of the big mistakes I see is just people putting so much effort into trying to rank rookies before the NFL draft. I mean, it's just, to me, it's almost a fool's errand. Things are going to change. We're going to be wrong about where we think guys are going. I mean, it makes no sense to me to put a lot of effort into that, because what you're doing is you're just creating an anchor point that you're going to keep going back to that you probably shouldn't have in your head at all. Mm-hmm. Personally, I try to keep my mind as clear as I can of trying to rank rookies against each other. I just want to know what they do well,
Mm-hmm.
like what does Drake London do well? What does
just James be a badass? That's what he does well. Right.
Yeah. What does James Williams do well? What does George Pickens do well besides beat the hell out of guys when he's blocking them? But but those are the things you want to know, and then I'm going to let the teams tell me a little bit more about what they think about what they've seen, because they have a lot more information than I'm ever going to have, obviously. And I know
your humility thing, right? That's your humility thing, right? You made AOD 2 years ago because of your humility quote, right?
Yes,
100%,
exactly.
right? The draft pedigree tells you so much. It's the most important thing, and it tells you more than you'll ever know, right? Like we could spend all of our time trying to figure out these guys' stuff, and we're still only going to know like 1 to maybe 2% about their life, right?
Right.
There's so much in the rest of what we don't know that determines the outcome, right? I mean, how could we have known how freakish that Josh Allen would work, and about how well he would blend, and how much confidence they would have in him? Like we couldn't have never predicted that. Never. It just wasn't going to happen, because it's information we just would have never had access to. And so, you look back and like, that's the pedigree stuff, right? You treat, you have to have a ton of value in what the NFL teams tell you about the cost. You're 100% right.
Yeah, absolutely. And one key concept that you outlined is that, you know, when players drop in the NFL draft, that tells us a lot more than when players rise. You want to talk about that concept just real quick?
Yeah, when players fall, right, that signals to you that 32 teams passed on them, right? And that might be, if you expect a guy to go mid first and he goes early fourth, Calvin Harmon, right? What's the guy that was he was Arizona, Hakeem Butler.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Like those guys like that. That's all you needed to know. You don't draft him in rookie draft. That's all you needed to know was that what we thought was a first round pick was passed on 3, if not 4 times by NFL teams, if not more than that. Right. Like that's all you need to know, because that right. and you could look on paper and say, like, here's all the reasons that he was good. And, you could see all the film people liked him or didn't like, whatever. If he drops that far, there's a ton of information there that's super valuable. I have this theory about, in my day job, I'm a prosecutor. And so when I pick a jury, I tend to try and look for people that I want to hang out with is probably not the right word for it, but that are going to be amenable to sitting there with 12 other people or 13 other, whatever, a group of other jurors and me and the judge and the defense attorney for a week and listen to all this stuff. Right. One of the things that I always look for is, has the person, what the person's age is, and have they ever been married? And if they haven't been married, do they have kids? And if they don't, if they're in their 40s or 50s and those things aren't true, it's a lot of like this, right? That might tell you there's maybe something that's off about them, or at least warrants a question, right? Of, if the person's never been married, is there a reason for that? Like, do they just not want to be married, or, or what is it? Right. But that's that's similar. Like, I've learned that lesson along the way. And then you start thinking about that and you say, okay, well, is the person just not get along with other people? Right? Are they just miserable to be around? Or is they just, they just like being single, right? Like, but I think you have to think about those things. It's the same thing with this, right? And I apply a ton of the stuff that we do in real life to that. And this is just another example of that, right? If teams constantly pass on a player, that's different. It's the same thing as like if a person gets married at 22, that doesn't mean they're the best catch in the world. They just got married early. You know what I mean? they got married early, and that doesn't mean that they're better than the person that was signal at 45. It just means you have to ask a different series of questions, right? And so that's the thing, right? You don't necessarily know about if they had dated all around and everyone hated them, they'd be single until forever, right? You didn't get the opportunity to find that out, right? It's a different set of information. So you have to balance those things and what they tell you about a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all know people who, they married the first person really that they went out with. They just kept going out with them, got married. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And oftentimes it can work out. But
like me, I must have drugged my wife. Like, that's the only thing I could explain it. So I hit one, and so that's it. But so that, I mean, I use that stuff in Dynasty, right? It's simple stuff about our lives that we use all the time about how we judge people that I think we sort of don't use our common sense a lot of times in Dynasty, and when we can, right? Like, there's simple situations, and one other thing too, you were asking like this, if we could just, I'm workshopping an idea, actually driving home. I'm test driving it with my daughter in the back seat. She's just looking at me weird. And I'm like, speaking of people that it's surprising that they got married by 35. You should never sacrifice an elite player for depth. Never. We do that all too often. It's terrible, and you shouldn't do it, because the players that are going to make a difference are the players that are up at the top of the board. And the difference between player 100 and player 180 isn't that big. It's just really not. And we spend way too much time. I saw someone talking about it on Facebook today, talking about, I have 101. Should I trade him for 105 and 109? I need depth. It's like a 16, 24, whatever. It was a big number league. And everyone's like, oh, you need the depth. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, if you give me 4 good players on that team, you're probably going to get to the playoffs, right? And Breece Hall's probably going to be one of them, Like, I think we sacrifice elite players and elite shots and elite outcomes for the safety and security of some depth or a warm and cozy feeling. And I think that that's a mistake too. So I did want to hit that because I test drove it with my daughter and she seemed to like it. And she's won. So
she cooed happily. Love it. Where do you want to go, Theo?
We've had a really active offseason for the NFL. There's been a crazy amount of player movement. How do you handle player movement? Do you see it more as a buying opportunity, or is it something that makes you apprehensive when a player, switches situations?
I drank a lot. I remember I went on vacation out to see my in-laws, and my brother-in-law, he's trying to figure out, what's his sister's husband doing with his life, and how can you record podcasts in February and March, and and then there was like, then March happened, right? And he would text me and he'd be like, oh my God. Oh, and I was like, you see, there's like enough stuff to do. There's a lot of value here. I think to be on top of the information and not overreact to it, right? To think about the impact that it makes, think about what it tells you, right? Like we were just reading today, and we have a subscriber chat over at AOD and at nfldraft.com, and someone sent in a link and it says the Packers might be in on Darren Waller. And it's interesting because like they brought in Adams, there's been a change of staff. Like there was some mystery a little bit about how Waller ended last year. Like it wasn't entirely clear what was going on, right? And I think there's multiple explanations for it. If you wanted to sort of, if you wanted to sort of draw different conclusions, I think they were reasonable conclusions to draw, especially with his background. And you start looking forward on that and you say, all right, well, what's that tell us? Right? Like, okay, like there's now Green Bay's interested. Like, okay. And you start drawing from it the fact that like, hey, they brought in Adams and like, and they've done some stuff that you're like, okay, like there's some signal there. Right. And I think that's one that probably surprised me a little bit more. But if we went back and looked at it from January and we said like, hey, we got this 30-year-old tight end who's got some mystery off the field, and they just brought in 160 target wide receiver 1. How do we think about the tight end? If we just sort of went back and revisited that with what we know right now, we would probably think a little bit differently. So I think kind of looking at that stuff makes some sense, and you're trying to play probabilities. Right? We generally know that wide receivers that change teams are, it's not a great thing. Right. It tends to not, like Stephon Diggs has been an outlier. Right? It's usually not a great thing. I think in different situations, you can make different bets, right? Not every time that a wide receiver changes teams are they going from a team where they're arguably the third best or the second or third best wide receiver pass catcher on their team, like Amari Cooper, to, by some measures, if, depending on how you think about Dallas offense, to being the number one in a Deshaun Watson-led offense, right? Arguably, he's getting an upgrade in opportunity. Arguably, he's getting an upgrade in quarterback. And like that's not always the case, right? So I think you have to sort of think about those things. And again, be willing to think about things a little bit differently. Everyone thinks that that Baltimore is this run-heavy team. You know who dropped back to pass more than any team in the NFL last year? Baltimore. And so you start looking at these things and you think, okay, well, why are we valuing, why is Marquise Brown valued where he is, right? Like that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense, and you start looking at some of these things and you just see like, you look beyond and you just look at the numbers and try and figure out what's actually going on. I think you can make a lot more bets just by teams will tell you what they're thinking by how they spend their money, right? And they will tell you how they're thinking and the plays that they decide to call, right? Baltimore decided that they wanted to throw a ton. And the fact that they went out and got Marquise Brown, that they went out and they got, Bateman, right? There's the potential that they go ahead and address the position again this year. It should probably tell us something, right? And that should, I think it's interesting. And it's interesting that they're in on running back too. Like there's some thoughts that they're in on running back. And there's questions about, if Dobbins is healthy and all these other things. Like there's a lot of this stuff that you can look at and say, huh. and have some questions about. And I mean, that's, I think, a lot of it, right? Because you're dealing with incomplete information, right? This is like poker. You're dealing with a lot of incomplete information. So the smirks that a player makes, or the breaths that they take after they look at their hole cards, right? You kind of have to figure out what that means. And you don't have a great shot, but you just keep collecting information. And you look for patterns and trends, right? Those are the things that I try and do. And it's tough to get right? Like it's tough to get. I mean, I studied this a lot, and it's tough to get it right, So a lot of humility. I always go back to Dan's thing, right? If I'm very certain about something, I'm almost certainly too confident in it, right? That's a lot of how I think about these things.
I do think there's oftentimes, and I don't know if it's more of just this offseason being so crazy, but I see buying opportunities. I think a lot of people try to get out from under new situations too quickly. Mm-hmm. I've seen in leagues I'm in, I've seen, Devontae Adams going for very reasonable trades, Tyreek Hill going for reasonable trade offers. Yeah. I think people are sometimes too quick to get from under it. And I think it might be a buying opportunity, especially because we're anticipating more and more players being moved.
But like by fear. Yeah. I love buying fear. Right. I think because and this is Jordan from like 2 or 3 years ago would be like not saying this, but to win a league, you need an elite outcome, right? You need you're trying to finish 1 out of 12. Right. If you're playing in a 12-team league, you're trying to finish 1 out of 12. And so how do you do that? Well, you have to be right. You have to be different, I think. Right. I think the easiest way to sort of get an edge is to be a little bit different. And to be right. Right. Well, if you can make a big difference on the bets you're right on, right, if they're consequential, right? Like you don't need to be right on a ton of them. Right. If you make 2 or 3 really consequential ones that are right. And I think Tyreek Hill is a great example of that because let's just play what season or who was the quarterback when Tyreek Hill had his largest ADOT of his career?
Alex Smith.
Alex Smith is the right answer.
Wow.
Okay. And you think about all the stuff that Patrick Mahomes has done with Tyreek Hill. Think about all of that, right? And all of what they have accomplished along the way. And it was Alex Smith who everyone complained for years wouldn't throw the ball down the field, who was actually the person that unlocked Tyreek Hill's deep game. We write off Tyreek Hill's vertical prowess in Miami at our own risk, right? We do that, and I think you're taking a ton of you're writing him off way too cheaply. And I always go back to this, like, do I think Tua is really good? I'm not sure. I have some questions, but I always go back to this thing that Trent Dilfer actually said about Tua, which he said he's the best 4 verts thrower I've ever seen. And whether that's true or not, we'll set aside. But if you were to exploit that, right, if it were to turn out to be true, who would do that? Tyreek Hill, right? Mm-hmm. Who would do that? Will Fuller, who they brought in last year. Right? Who would do that? Right? Those types of guys that can be vertical threats. Like the Fuller thing didn't work out, right? And they ended up using, Waddle a little bit differently, but they sort of double down on that, right? And if you were to say like, hey, what's the thing that like, if a couple of things are true, what's a massive outcome that's at a discount? It's Tyreek Hill being an elite wide receiver with Tua as a pretty good deep ball thrower, right? Like because he didn't really get that with Mahomes last year, right? Like that's the funny thing about this is Tyreek Hill looked a lot more like Juju Smith-Schuster last year than he did like Alex Smith era Tyreek Hill. Mm-hmm. And when you start thinking about that, you're like, okay, well, could this situation actually unlock itself in a way that maybe it's different than we think? That's a great example of it. And so the answer to the question is yes, we should be buying, and we should have done that on Diggs, right? When he went to, and everyone thought Josh Allen sucked. And listen, like the biggest bet I've ever made in Dynasty fantasy football, the biggest one I've ever made has been on Deshaun Watson. And because the consequences, because it was cheap, right? Like a lot of times it cost me at or about the pick that was Mac Jones, right? That's about what it cost me to make trades for him. It cost me, maybe it was a future first or whatever. Like I structured a lot of trades where I said, if I miss here, it's not going to be consequential, but if I win, it can be massively, right? You're looking for huge upside bets, right? And those things may only present themselves 1, 2, 3 times a year, but you're doing a massive disservice to yourself if you're not in on them, right? And you just go back like the Zeke thing, right? When Zeke was the Tyreek Hill stuff, when all that stuff was going on, where the allegations about his, about the injuries to his child, and I think it was his child or his girlfriend or something. He had some allegations. Zeke stuff with his suspension, right? And you just keep going back, and every year, there's a couple of these things that happen that if you're not on the buy, when everyone wrote Aaron Rodgers off, he's won 2 MVPs since then. Right? You have to kind of be in on the things that have high upside, I think, because if you're right on them, it massively swings. Right? It's a massive difference. And that, like being in on Stafford, right? Like that was huge, right? Like that's a big difference that really moves the needle. And when you can do those things and embrace risk, I think there's a lot of times people aren't willing to do that. It's a lot of people that are playing not to win. They're playing not to finish in last. And the difference in those mindsets is the difference between the people that win leagues and make a big profit and the people that don't.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing you and Chad have hit on your podcast. And by the way, why don't you give a quick plug to that podcast as well, Jordan?
Yeah, the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Yeah, you can find it. Just search for the Football Guys Dynasty Show. We're actually transitioning over to our new feed come June 1. It's there right now, but we are on the Audible feed at footballguys.com and the Football Guys Audible podcast feed. And we're transitioning. We just had our 100th episode, which I didn't realize until we were recording it. I should have we could have celebrated more, but we'll have to work on it for episode 200. But yeah, you can find us on the Audible network, or just go and Football Guys Dynasty Show. We have our own feed that all our shows are on as well. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a great listen. It's definitely absolutely one of my must listen to podcasts every week.
Mine as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Again, the checks are in the mail, guys. I appreciate it.
But you guys talk about a lot of great concepts there. And so, I find it always informative, because one of the things you guys do is you kind of take some questions and then also just kind of, handle some comments from the Football Guys chat or whatever, where you explore some concepts as well. So nice mix of things going on there. Moving kind of into before we move into the next part, let's talk a little bit about that random future first concept. We sort of hit it a little bit earlier, but what is a random future first actually worth to you, Jordan? How would you explain that?
So typically the random future first to me is right. You're thinking about a 2023 first or out into the future, right? And how to value that. I tend to, for a number of reasons, I delved into this I actually did like a whole chapter basically about this a couple years ago. I think it was the 2020 edition. For a ton of reasons, I think that the picks are undervalued. I say that with a big asterisk that I'll get to in a second. They're undervalued because people think that their pick is going to be later than it typically is. They're undervalued because when you actually look at the production value, right? If you just measure, I use my wins over replacement metric. When you actually look at them, everyone thinks it's like, oh, it's between 6 and 7, right? Which would be the exact middle of the round, would be between the 6th and the 7th pick. It's actually not that. It's at 105, right? Because the difference between 101 and 102 is a lot bigger than the difference between 111 and 112, right? So when you start looking at the math on it, the random pick is actually worth more than you would think the exact middle of the round is, by like 10 to 12%, right? That stuff adds up. You make 10 to 12% bets over and over again that are better. All of a sudden, you're going to be elite really quickly, right? Because then you're talking about, over the course of a year or two, you might be talking about another core player. Then you're talking about another star player, right? And then you're talking about really some big time deals there. So those small edges can really add up. So I do think there's value in that. So I typically value it from a production perspective. I think about 105. And then I think about, like, we were talking about this before the show. I typically haven't been one to trade future first round picks. It's not something that I've done a ton of, really, until the last 12 months, I've been hesitant to do it for a lot of reasons. I've been less hesitant to do it more recently. It's something I've been more aggressive on. We talk about the Watson thing. We talk about some other things. Like, I'm willing to include it if it's an elite player, right? I think top 30, it's got to be a top 30 guy, basically, for me to sort of engage in those things. Like, that's always the test of if I want to trade my future first. Does it involve a top 30 asset? If the answer to that question is no, then no. I'm not entertaining it. Otherwise, right, we can sort of think about it. So those are some things that I've tended to do. From a value perspective, 105 is a production point. I think it's more valuable than that. And the reason is because it has liquidity, right? It's not going down. And not that I'm super worried about what my future valuation is, but it's the situations. I want to be able to get into situations that can make my team better, right? So I want to be able to trade for Deshaun Watson when his value plummets. Right? I want to have the assets in my pocket to be able to pay with that in cash and not credit, right? So having future first is a great way to do that, right? I want to, if in season I'm really good and Leonard Fournette can be, my trump card, right, down the stretch and can carry me for a 6-week stretch in 2022. If I have an extra pick along the way, whether that's my own pick, whether that's an extra first, whatever, multiple seconds, whatever it is, if I have that in my pocket and I can pay that, right, that's stuff that I'm not necessarily borrowing or mortgaging my future to do. So I think a lot in that way, they're more valuable in the utility of them probably than the picks that we'll make, depending on the class. Right? I think next year everyone thinks it's going to be a good class. It's probably just going to make the utility of them even higher. And I like rookie picks. I like rookie values. I like rookie drafts. I think there's a lot more things you can do with it now, and that's a part of my game that I'm continuing to try and get better at. So I think for a lot of reasons they're undervalued, but I think they're undervalued. I think probably the most untapped reason they're undervalued is because people don't use them, aren't willing to use them for the utility of them in season or, to really go out and get an elite player.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And, just to kind of put the visual behind it. I mean, one of the things Jordan was talking about is the value of the 101 versus the 112. If you I'm going to try to do this in the air, but if you take a look at my finger, and I have to go the right way, and you look at the curve of a rookie draft pick from 101, and then you go, sorry, I keep going the wrong way, down to 112. I mean, it's a curve. It's not, like a straight line.
It's like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It's like if you think you're going down a roller coaster.
Yeah. It's a lot easier if I use this hand. It goes like this. So we have all just been witness to my complete dyslexia when it comes to working on a camera. So if you're not watching the YouTube, you definitely need to catch that just for the laughs.
You definitely need to go back to that and look at that. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think of it as it's not a line, right? It's like how if you were riding on a roller coaster, right? It's a steep drop off and then you start to flatten out. I can't hit my camera. It's a steep drop off and then you start to flatten out.
Right.
That's how I think of it, right? And so the difference between, right, you're not going that far down the last 3 seconds of the roller coaster as you are the first 3 seconds of a whatever.
Yeah,
27
on a particular drop on a roller coaster. Yeah,
100%. The end of that is not as steep, right? The difference doesn't make as much sense, right? It's where it's the beginning that makes the big deal. So having those random shots at higher picks, right, that's a big deal. Again, having a random shot that could be 101, is a really valuable thing. I mean, that's already a top 20 asset in most classes. That's on average what it is, right? And if you look in the top, we'll say, I think the 106 is like around pick 50 or so. It's at the end of the fifth. 106 is at the end of the fifth round. So pick 60, right? And so, you start going up from there. It's at the end of the fifth round. So pick 60. Yeah. And then you start going up from there and the one is at 20, right? And then it goes down, it drops, and they drop pretty steeply. But having that shot at a top, and again, we're bad at predicting which ones they're going to be. By the way, really bad.
Right.
And we could go through a whole exercise on that. We don't need to, but let's just suffice it to say that a lot of the stuff that happened last year, we could write an entire chapter about AOD just with the stuff that happened between April 25th, which it is today, and August 25th, that completely reshaped dynasty leagues, completely reshaped them. J.K. Dobbins, Akers, I mean, just go on and on. ETN, right? Deshaun Watson, right? Like, just go on and on and on about things that happened that made huge differences. And, and that's all stuff that we've got months to go before those things play out. Picks are random at this point, and you got to be really careful about investing, thinking yours is going to be really good.
Again, it comes back to humility,
100%. 100%.
That's the underlying concept there as well. It's just you don't know as much as you think you know. You don't know as much about who the team you're trading with, how good they're going to be is what you think, and especially in if you do FFPC dynasties or some similar form where there's actually a tournament for the 101 where the better teams get the 101. Then that even turbocharges your logic even more, because the thing is all you need is for that team to just miss the playoffs. Right. And, all of a sudden they become an even better bet for the 101, so if they finish at 107, if they finish seventh place, it's like, oh baby.
I wonder, I would love an exercise about this. Like, do you have a better chance of getting the 101 with the worst team in the league or with the fourth best team in the league? Right? Like, if you were to sort of predict them going into the league, like, which one of those is the better odds to get the 101, right, in an FFPC? And it's like the balance between those would be super interesting. You know what I mean? Just because I think it would be, because there's a good chance that the fourth team gets into the regular playoffs, but there's a good chance that they're going to beat up on the team that is actually the worst team if they were to get into the non-team. You know what I mean? So it's it would be definitely an interesting debate there.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, we've all played enough FFPC that we know that the worst, when it actually comes down to the end of the season, and we've ranked the teams 1 through 12. The team ranked 12 usually ends up picking 103 or 104 because they just don't even have the strength to make it into that final game. To get the 101 or 102. So totally. Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yep. All right. Theo, anything else you want to hit on the first part?
Before we get into the NFL draft and rookie valuation, is there any trades that you're looking to make prior to the NFL draft, like right now? Is there any sort of trades you'd be recommending, or certain trades you're looking to make yourself in these next hours before the NFL draft starts?
Get the hell out of Antonio Gibson.
There you go.
That's what I would be doing.
Sound advice right there.
They've met with every running back that's played football in the last 3 years, I believe, in the pre-draft process. That doesn't sound like a good sign.
Yeah, and if you're in a league with me where I still own Antonio Gibson, please just don't listen.
Yeah.
Jordan doesn't know what he's talking about. He's completely off base here.
By the way, what's weird about that, we talked about the mock drafts beforehand. That hasn't been reflected there.
No,
if you look at who they've actually met with, it's been a lot of running backs. So I'm like at this. I don't know what it's about, but I'm spooked. So I don't know a ton of Antonio Gibson, but yeah,
it's very very odd. Yeah. And then just one more question, kind of in a similar sense. We've heard you speak highly of Breece Hall. Dan and I are very high on Breece Hall as well. He's the consensus 101 right now. If you were to move the 101, would you want to do so in the next few days, or are you rolling the dice that the landing spot is? I'm not going to say great. I'm going to say, but not bad.
What's a good landing spot for him?
Well, we can go two ways on that. There's the train of thought that it's the immense volume. Landing spots, which puts him on some pretty bad offenses, but you could foresee him getting a lot of receiving work and rushing work. Or there's just that he's a Teflon prospect and he's going to put some other running back out to pasture, and we should ignore the landing spot, which I'm kind of on that train. I don't necessarily I'm not necessarily scared of the landing spot, but him going to an Atlanta or a Houston might be more appealing to some people than him landing into a higher echelon NFL offense.
And it's interesting because those aren't Kansas City when Clyde Edwards-Helaire landed there. Those aren't Indianapolis when Jonathan Taylor landed there. Right? That's not Dallas when Zeke. Right? That's not the Giants with what I think people thought was a better Giants team than maybe, Atlanta this year is. Right? Like, it's really interesting because, like, I don't have a great, again, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, there's not like a ton of great, like, wide open day one bell cow lead back roles. There's just, and I think that the supply is better. Like if you were to look at Devin Singletary in Buffalo, for example, as being the backup to a Breece Hall, I think Devin Singletary is probably better than the typical guy in his place was in 2015, right? Like, and how do we sort of react to that, right? And how's the market going to react to that, right? And that situation probably isn't that great considering Allen runs a ton, right? Like at the red zone, like he's going to pound in, a half dozen rushing touchdowns a season. That's a big difference, right? So I don't know if there's going to be a situation that makes one of those guys massively uptick. And so that gives me a little bit of like, at the same time, I'm like, well, maybe I can buy into that. Like, I don't know. I'm interested in I'm interested in having him. So I'm interested in paying up for it. I wonder if it's rare that it's worth less after the pick is made or after the draft. But I wonder if there's a potential that he gets buried. I still think Kenneth Walker is alive. I still think he's live to be the first running back drafted. And that would be really fascinating because let's just spitball this for a second. Let's say that Walker is drafted by the Bills at 25 and Hall goes to Houston or Atlanta, like you mentioned, and in round 2. How are we
here's
thinking
maybe
about
an even worse
that?
one. Breece Hall to the Giants.
Oof.
Well, maybe that would be a good situation for Barkley to get drafted, to get traded, which would be kind of nice. Well, one of them that's interesting. Like I think that's interesting. I think another one that's plausible is the Titans. Right? You look at everyone was all lathered up about Derrick Henry last year. When you actually look at his performance, it was all volume. It was not particularly effective, right? He had a massive drop off in terms of like his broken tackle stats. His PFF grade dropped off a cliff. His rushing yards over expectation plummeted, right? Everything, all of his stats fell. Is that volume related? Maybe. Is it like he's aging pretty quickly? Like that could be very well true as well. I think they're a live bet to draft someone really early on. And that's a situation where that, like if that's Kenneth Walker, a guy that we could be thinking about as being running back, as being 102 in a super flex draft right now, could plummet, right? And that's a situation like how do you sort of react to that? So I would probably be buying if he was a later first round rookie pick, right? That would be how I would react to it. So those are some of the like, I don't like the situation stuff. I think there's a chance, maybe not necessarily a great one. There's a chance that these guys are actually buried and not in great spots, right? Because I don't think there's a ton of like, if you start looking around and squinting, like again, if Breece Hall's drafted by Washington at whatever they pick in the first round, do we feel great about that? Because like they still have Gibson, they still have McKinnon, so I start looking around at all these and let's just assume crazy draft pedigree that we don't expect. Like even those situations don't seem that great. So it's really interesting. I don't know if the market's going to be overreacting to landing spots like they have in the past because I don't think we're going to get the opportunity to. Whereas like there isn't a running back version of wide receiver to Green Bay. There's just not this year. Right? Yeah. Like that would be the situation. I think that most people would move. There's not that situation this year. Running back.
Yeah, for sure.
Did I answer your question? I don't know. We got wide.
No, I think it's
this is what happens.
I think it's kind of like a glass. It's like a glass half full situation. Like if you're nervous about it, you might want to consider taking an offer before the draft. I think most players are going to sit still and draft at the 101 and not move until they're on the clock. But I think that there might be, if you're getting a immense offer and there's an overpay for the 101 and you want to consider that, I think it's like Jordan said, there are nightmare scenarios where this 101 becomes worth a little less. And let's say Walker and Hall both don't have ideal landing spots. And then it comes into those two guys versus a wide receiver in play.
The answer to the question isn't the wide receiver in that scenario, by the way.
I know it's not for you.
It should not be the wide receiver.
Yeah.
Like, don't get baited into doing that and overreacting. Like, let me just so that way I put a fine point on this. Even if the situation feels uncomfortable, I still think over the course of that rookie contract, you're going to feel fine about the outcome. Like, I'm still fine, even if day 1 or week 6 or week 10 feels like about Breece Hall. Like, I still think you're going to feel fine, right? Like, you're going to, like, he's a good player. They pick good players. And honestly, like, what I find myself doing is I pick a lot of running backs. I have a lot of depth at running back, and it allows me to sort of cycle through the life cycle of them. Right. So I'm not super afraid of guys like Kamara or, Dalvin Cook, or as they sort of come down in price, because I'm backfilling them with Hall, and I'm not worried about Hall year 1. Right. I'm just not or week 1. Right. Because I'm backfilling him. And then I'm just saying, all right, by the time Fournette cycles out, or whoever's in front of Kamara or Mixon, right? The guys that are a generation ahead of him cycle out. Like, Hall will be entering his prime, right? Or will be, or he will be competing with those guys for lineup spots, right? That's how I think you do it. And, you're not drafting there for need. People make fun of Dave Gettleman. I think Dave Gettleman had the best piece of advice that you could give to a dynasty GM. The best piece of advice, which is, he's talking about the NFL draft, but he says, don't draft for need. He goes, address your needs before the draft, whether that's via trade or free agency. Fill the needs to a sufficient spot that you don't feel pressure to draft a need on the clock. And everyone makes fun of Dave Gettleman, but I think that's the best piece of advice I've ever heard a GM actually give regarding drafting to dynasty GMs, right? Because that will stop you from making oh no, I'm bummed about the landing spot because Breece Hall's blocked by whoever, right? Like, that'll stop you from doing that and allow you to sort of take that. Because again, you want the guy that's going to make the big time difference. That's Hall. Or
right. And just even to go a step beyond that, the thing that we have going for us as dynasty managers is that, Gettleman, basically, he knows when the draft is over, 90% of his trading opportunities have dried up.
Yep.
Whereas for us as dynasty managers, we don't even need to necessarily have things locked down before the draft to, just go ahead and take the best player available.
Totally.
Because we still have months that we can do trading and get to where we need to go. I don't care who my starting running backs are right now. I don't know who I'm going to put in at wide receiver 2 in some of my leagues.
Right.
I don't know. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to get out there, get the best players I can, and then try to figure it out from there. And then the other thing I just wanted to address real quick, you were talking about the running backs and not being too concerned about where they're at, week 1 and feeling okay with that. Case in point would be Javonte Williams. I think everybody who drafted him felt pretty good about drafting him over the summer. Maybe about week 7 or so last year, week 8. I don't know how good they felt about, drafting Javonte Williams. I'm sure it was, a lot of the Javonte Williams owners were like, yeah, I don't know about this guy, but now all of a sudden, all you had to do is just hold on to him and to not be in a position where you felt like you had to have him in the lineup and scoring you points, just keep him on your bench. And now all of a sudden you're looking at like, what is he, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, something like that, running back in dynasty valuation.
Right. And how would you have felt like at this time let's go back a year ago today. The following, right, how if I had told you that the running back 5 on the season was James Conner, the running back 6 was Leonard Fournette, and the running back 10, depending on how you positionally put him, Football Guys has him as a running back, Cordero Patterson at running back 10, right? Like, you wouldn't have predicted any of that, right? Like,
Right.
Or, you know, maybe you would have put Fournette there, but I don't think you would have predicted Connor to be there. No one would have put Cordell Patterson. I love Cordell Patterson. No one would have put him there.
I could tell you from redraft, Jordan, that nobody was putting Fournette there either.
Yeah, well, it looked like a block situation, right? And we got like a half into the season, and I remember this Football Guys staff chat would be like, "Oh shit." Like, oh, the right bet was Fournette, and this is like, you know, we're like, oh shit, like we hedged, and you know, and fortunately we didn't, you know, I didn't in Dynasty, but like, you know, and I don't do a ton of redraft stuff, but like, we were like, oh, like it didn't take long to figure out we were wrong,
right?
And you know, we spent, and how much time is that? And that's even people that are like particularly adept at studying in-season stuff, right? Like we're talking about redraft people who are better, presumably, at situational stuff from year to year than Dynasty people are, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty there. So all those situations change. So, and again, we could go back and look at all the stuff that we're like, a lot of the stuff you could think you have a major weakness right now, and it turns out to be a strength, vice versa. Right, like you could think you're like set at quarterback or set at wide receiver and be in a heap of trouble by the time October rolls around. So build good teams, get good assets, and then you can figure it out later on.
Bet on talent, no doubt about it. I mean, you know, you can say what you want about Fournette's talent, but he's more talented than most running backs. You know, you can poke holes in his game. You know, there are things he doesn't do as well as other backs, but you know, you can look at him versus Saquon and say Saquon's a superior back in almost every way. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. Fournette's still good enough, you know. And
right.
And you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Absolutely. Love that. I love that. Right.
So
yes,
there we go.
100%.
All right. I want to be in the 2023 AOD then.
Yeah,
I think you just made it. You just made it.
Get a wall of Danisms behind me.
Yeah.
I love that. The perfect is the enemy of the good. I love that's a great that's like parenting. Like again, we go back to like all these things, like just applying regular life. Like you know, I don't care as where the toys are, just as long as they're like not like I'm not tripping on it. I don't give a where they are. Like
right.
We
there's
like
a clear path through the Waygos. That's
right.
That's
right.
The main
it's like
thing.
I could figure like just sweep them aside, right? Like, do they look great? No, but like there's no judge to this competition. Like I just want to get to the bathroom. Right. Like we do that. We do all that stuff in real life, and then we totally disregard it in Dynasty. Be like, my team has to be perfect. Like I need 100% odds that I'm going to make a championship game before I'm going to go for it. And you're like, like that's not how it works, you know. And I just think, you know, a ton of the stuff that we talk about is you know, is applying a lot of like life's lessons to this, because one of my favorite questions to ask people when we do strategy sessions and I'll talk with folks and I'll just be like, what do you do for a living? And you'd be stunned at how much what they do for a living comes out in how they think about their team. You know, I've had people that are, you know, that are into finances and they're totally clinical about this thing, right? And then you have people that are coaches and they're like, you know, talking about player development. They're talking about all this stuff. And, you know, and then like, I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm cold and calculating about trades because I can say, hey, this is the value that I want. I'll take it if I find it. If not, I'm going to hold on to it, right? Like you just see all these different things about how people evaluate it. And we do it all the time, but I think we ignore some of life's lessons. And it's just, I don't know. We leave a lot of value on the board just because we're trying to make things perfect instead of just good.
Right. Exactly. And that's the restaurant manager in me who's, you know, sometimes it's like you're just trying to, you know, make it 10 minutes or 15 minutes down the road.
100%. 100%.
You know?
Right. Like you don't want your, like, there's a lot of servers that you have that you might not necessarily want to like handle your finances, but like that's not what you're using them for, right? Like you don't want them to do your books, you want them to deliver the food and be nice to the people, right? Like that's, you know, like it's and we miss a lot of those lessons in Dynasty.
Yep, exactly. Yep, no doubt about it. All right, let's put in a quick. We're going all over the place, but this has been a great conversation. Yes, that's exactly what I like about it, because I mean, you know, Jordan always brings the good stuff, and we, you know, we have a show sheet, and we're like so far off it. It's totally excellent. But I do want to get in the underdog plug. talk a little bit about Underdog. Fun, not Dynasty, but definitely a fun place to play redraft. There's they've got their big tournament coming up that will be starting right after the NFL draft. You can do 3-person drafts, 6-person drafts, 10-person drafts, 12-person drafts. Tournament. You can you can bet on stuff. You can you can get into basketball. Hockey, baseball. You name it. So there's a million things you can do on Underdog, and the most important thing you can do is if you don't have the Underdog account, go ahead and get in there, put in $100. And put in the code district, and Underdog is going to match that $100 with $100 of their own. So you'll all of a sudden double your money from 100 to 200, just like that. So make sure you're putting in the code district, and you'll double your money if you don't have an Underdog account yet. And if you don't, you definitely should. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, so let's move on to the NFL draft. We've dipped our toes in it several times. In and out. But I think one of the main things that we can do for our listeners is let's just talk real quickly about how you're generally tiering up the running backs versus wide receivers in the rookie drafts. If once we know the NFL draft capital, right, Jordan? Because we don't know anything until we know that. But say a wide receiver drafted in the first round versus a running back drafted in the second round, which way are you going?
It's an even bet historically. The way I would think about it is if you're looking at the positions, first round running backs over wide receivers, and then it's first round wide receivers or second round running backs, second round wide receivers, third round running backs, and then third. And then it's kind of about equal. That's how it basically goes until you get to really day 3. So then third round wide receivers and fourth round running backs are pretty close. And then after that, you can pretty much disregard wide receivers, generally speaking, and just draft running backs or some of the other positions. I'm not in on day 3 wide receivers or anything like that. Typically, there might be an occasional outlier, like Justin Ross might be an outlier this year, but otherwise, I'm not really in on those guys, and you should take them and spend elsewhere. So I think generally speaking, those are the types of tiers you think about. It'll be interesting because I'm not sure how this pans out, right? I think that there's people that are bullish on how many guys go on day 2 for running backs. All of a sudden, you could actually have a lot of guys going on day 2 for running backs and very few guys going on day 2 for wide receivers. And all of a sudden, there's a supply and demand issue that forces the wide receivers up earlier. I'd be really interested to see how that goes. That's I guess a theory out there that I'd be interested to see how that plays out. But that's generally how I do it. And then you have to sort of decide between the tiers.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I'm kind of worried about the opposite scenario. I'm worried about what if there's only 3 or 4 day 2 running backs, and there's maybe a dozen or so wide receivers that go in the first 3 rounds. Mm-hmm. So then all of a sudden you're looking at all but 3 or 4, maybe 3 running backs are round 4 or worse. Mm-hmm. That's that's going to make this rookie draft really interesting. That's the point where I'm just going to be I'll be starting to bail out of some of my picks. Make
sure you don't. Yeah, I think the lesson is don't make whatever you do. Don't draft a day 3 prospect in the first with a first round pick ever. Trade it for something, anything before you do that. Right? That situation has never worked well. And even if it's a juicy, I don't know. Your favorite day 3 running back lands in Atlanta, and then Cordell Patterson retires, right? That's still not a good situation, right? Don't spend 111 on that. That's not what you do. So yeah, I do think the whole balance is going to be interesting. I think it's and it'll be interesting where the first round wide receivers lie. It's a really interesting draft because I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's not a good class because the running back class isn't that good. I think is generally how I feel about this, and the quarterback class isn't that good. So when that happens, like you kind of have to deal with it. So I just think you use your like I use my AOD principles and just clinical about it and be like, I'm not going to, if I can get future assets for any of this, like that's great. I'll put it in savings and I'll deal with it next year. So, or some other point with liquid assets.
I think that's a great segue to the next question. We have there's, I'm not sure exactly how your wide receiver rankings lie pre-draft, but
I don't have them.
Important, you got a couple you like. You got a couple wide receivers you like.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, that's fair.
How important would landing spot be as like a tiebreaker for these wide receivers, like a Kansas City or Green Bay? Take the 6th wide receiver off the board. Would that impact your rankings, or is it's something you're? I mean, how heavy are you weighing that?
I think drafting landing spot can be really tough with the with wide receivers. So that would be something I'd be cautious about doing. Where I think there's probably value in it is watching other people do that. And so, for example, if Green Bay drafting, again, I'm just spitballing names here, George Pickens in the first round, and that causes Drake London to fall to wide receiver 5. Just spitballing numbers here. That would be really interesting to me. Okay, that would be I would be more into that than taking any of these guys. I am much more likely to take wide receiver 3, 4, or 5 than I am ever to take wide receiver 1 or 2, just because it hasn't historically been a good strategy, and I don't think that deciding between those is something that we're particularly good at. We haven't shown any ability to do that historically, and I just, again, all I hear is Dan in the back, be humble, be humble. That's just how I treat these things. So anytime I can get the opportunity to let other people, for other people to pay me to make that decision on their own, that's what I'm all about. So that's how I, because I'm leveraging randomness and I'm letting them pay me to take a random bet. That's how I'm looking at it. So if those what I'm hoping those opportunities pay for is cheaper wide receivers for me later on, right? Because I view those first round wide receivers to be pretty much the same probabilistic bets.
Yeah, exactly. If you can entice somebody to make a bad bet and give you something for it, that's the ultimate outcome. If you can get a league mate to trade up, take your, if you've got the 103 and you're saying, okay, I think it's going to be Hall, I think it's going to be Walker, and then I think it's going to be 5 wide receivers. If you can get the guy at 107 or 108 to trade up to your 103 and give you something else besides, I mean, it's like, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah,
because they are, now the onus is on them to be right. Because now you have, you're still getting somebody in that same tier because you've already decided these guys are all in the same tier. You're saying, I think they're close enough to equal, maybe not exactly equal, but close enough.
Yeah.
They're all reasonably good bets.
Yes.
Yeah. And now, I'm going to get a future second or whatever, doesn't even really matter what, as long as you can get something, you want to hopefully try to get something that's as valuable as it can possibly be. But still, just getting anything on top of that is moving yourself forward.
And you're getting more outs with your bet.
Right.
Like Jordan talked about, and also Scott Connor the other night talked about, it's always seems to be the best bet. And, thinking you have these wide receivers figured out where, going into the draft, there's not necessarily a consensus wide receiver 1, but it's just, Jamar Chase level. I think you're betting on, the rankings being wrong. I think it's a nice bet to make right now.
Yes.
Yeah. For sure. Okay. So how do you view the draft class as a whole? We're gonna try to wrap up here quickly. Are you okay for a few more minutes, Jordan?
Oh yeah, I'm here all. Yeah, we can talk right until the first pick's off the board. We got this.
All right.
I'm here for. I got 3 straight days in me. Yeah, I got caffeine and everything. We're good.
Okay. So how do you look at the draft class as a whole this year? Comparing it to the 2020 and 2021, I mean, I think it's worse. How much worse, and in what ways do you feel like it's specifically worse?
I mean, it's worse in terms of difference makers because it doesn't have good quarterbacks and doesn't have. We'll see with the running backs, but like, for example, right? Like, there's been two. I believe this. I know before last year, it was definitely true, and I believe last year too. Since 2008, when I've tracked rookie draft ADP, you go back and you look, and it's first guys that were drafted in the first round of rookie drafts. There's only been two that haven't averaged a reception per game for running backs. They haven't averaged a reception per game in college. Ronald Jones, Ray Rice. Kenneth Walker is going to be number 3. He's running back 2 in this class. That tells you a lot about the class. And again, I like Kenneth Walker, but that's what we're dealing with. Okay, that's what we're dealing with. And so does that mean he's going to bust? Not necessarily. Do I like him? Probably better than Ronald Jones? Yes. Is there reasons to think that he's probably better than being a total zero at receiving? Yeah, right. I mean, you look at some of the ancillary stuff, you can draw some favorable, strings from it. But that's the consensus running back too. That's what we're dealing with. So that's a problem, right? We might not have a top 10 quarterback. That's a problem, right? Like that's, and you start looking at these things, and I had it in the book, and you start looking at some of the stuff with the, let me just see. You just start looking at the average data for these, for the draft picks. For example, top 3 picks, right? On average, historically, that's a top 19 running back, right? A pick in the top 19 picks of the draft, and a wide receiver is in the top 9 picks of the draft. That's historically the average for top 3 picks in a rookie draft, right? There's a very good chance that number is 0 this year. You just go out and you look at it again at running back. It's a top 43 pick in the top, and picks 4 through 6 is the average. It's a good chance that's 0 again, right? Like, how many wide receivers is that at 20? You go down and you look, tight ends in the first round, in the first 2 rounds of rookie drafts, historically, been top 40 picks. There's a good chance that's 0, right? In the top, basically you look and start 1 ADP, it's 13 is the top 2 rounds for quarterbacks. There's a chance that's 0, right? Like, or that the 1 is Kenny Pickett. Right. Again, then you convert that to Superflex, and you're like, all of a sudden you're like, this is a huge disaster of some assets. Right. So you start comparing it to that, and you're like, my God, like, we could have 0 guys be worth top 6 picks. Like, that's a bad outcome. So that's kind of the problem with I think with this class, because there's almost 0 outs at tight end or quarterback for those things to happen.
Right. So, at quarterback, who are the most likely ones, do you think, if there is an out? Do you have a guy or two that you feel like is the most likely to be that out?
I'm going to spend my tomorrow researching quarterbacks. I've waited just because I think what the NFL tells us is going to be more valuable than anything I can tell you on a spreadsheet. But I do want to look at there's a couple of stats that I really want to dive into, and I'm going to spend my tomorrow literally looking at it. I think Sam Howell is going to be interesting if he's on day 2. Again, at that, like, I think teams should take more quarterbacks than they probably do. And so I think, like, the idea of taking Jalen Hurts made a lot of sense for Philly. I think taking Jordan Love made a lot of sense for Green Bay. It didn't work out, but they could have drafted any other position, and it equally could not have worked out, right? They could have drafted, they could have traded up and drafted for Jalen Reagor, and it not worked along the way. There's other stuff that they could have done along the way that wouldn't have worked out either, right? So I do think teams drafting quarterbacks and taking a shot on them makes some sense. I think following suit on that, a guy like Davis Mills, for example, probably should have been more intrigued with last year than I was. I wrote him off, which was probably a mistake. This year, I think taking bets like that in 2nd and 3rd rounds of rookie drafts is probably a good idea, even if the whiff rate's high, right? Because if Davis Mills doesn't do anything ever again, he's still been more profitable, right? You still could have pivoted from him. You still probably could have moved up a spot at quarterback, right? You maybe got some starts at him, whatever, right? Like, he's still provided plus expectations on what he did, and there's outs that he's a potential starter long term, right? I mean, heck, he threw for a lot less passing attempts I think he threw for less than half of the attempts in college that Trevor Lawrence did, and basically it was a part-time starter through injuries for a couple of years, and outproduced Trevor Lawrence as a rookie, right? So like you start looking at those things, you're like, all right, well maybe he does have some upside if that's where the two came from. So I do think trying to understand those and taking some shots. I think Howell is one with some of his rushing stuff. He's somewhat dreadful as a passer in some of the decisions that he makes. But I think his rushing stuff's interesting. Corral's one that's interesting. I think Ritter's interesting as well. I think he could be I think he's a likelihood to go on day one, right? So I think how they all fit together, but I wouldn't push guys up my board. I'm trying to take more selective bets, right? Maybe that means, I don't know, if there's 5 or 6 guys in the top 100, maybe that means I'm more interested in quarterbacks 4 through 6 than I am spending a first round rookie pick on picks 1 through 3, especially if those guys aren't going to be top 10 guys, if that makes sense. And if there's no top 10 guys, give me the guys at 4 through 6 at a round plus discount. That would sort of be my thought process.
Right. That totally makes sense because, I mean, once you get down into the, especially past the first half of the second round, your expectation for whoever you pick there has to be that probably ultimately they're going to fail.
Right.
It's just whether they're going to provide some sort of a value or a get out point along the way.
100%.
So
100%.
And
I think you'll get an early reveal, right? Like
right.
we can look at last year's class and be like, all right, we kind of know that Kellen Mond sucks. Like
right.
I like Kellen Mond coming out. That was interesting.
I like Kellen Mond better than I like Davis Mills.
Right.
And I was mad in one of my rookie drafts because somebody sniped me on Mond and I had to take Mills.
Right. Right.
Right. And here I am with Mills and a super flex and I'm going, all right. Yeah,
it's not bad. and Mike Zimmer was like audibly laughing at the idea of playing Kellen Mond, right? Like it was disdainful laughter.
Yes, he was.
I mean, again, and we don't know. Maybe he can't figure out the playbook. Maybe he's out drinking until 4 a.m. Like we have no idea. I mean, I don't know. But there's a wide range of things about why he can't. What we don't know.
Well, he is an Aggie, and us Baylor people, we have
there you go, Dan.
About that. So I can give you some ideas. Anyway.
But yeah, so I mean, the Davis Mills thing's interesting. I mean, that doesn't mean draft him in round 1, but again, that if it's the 5th, 6th quarterback, right? I think that's an interesting one. And honestly, he had maybe the best shot of any of those guys to be a starter in year 1. You get an early reveal. And if he sucks, he sucks, and you can cut him. But if he's anything, right, he's probably has some value. And if it's again adding another young piece with him to get into a higher quarterback range, you're just trying to move up the board in the hierarchy, the AOD hierarchy of assets, if you will. And Mills would have been a key piece in that.
Right. And sometimes those assets have value in ways that aren't necessarily as obvious either. Because like the league where I took Mills, I'd also I was really poor at quarterback in this league. I'd taken over an orphan and it was kind of a major rebuild. And so anyway, I got Justin Fields. I already had Kirk Cousins, and then I got Davis Mills. So all of a sudden now I've got 3 starting quarterbacks where I only had 1 before. So already this is a win. And then this year, I was able to make a couple trades, and I was able to add Dak Prescott without losing a quarterback.
Right.
So now I got 4 quarterbacks, and instead of trading off Davis Mills, I traded off Justin Fields, who was worth more. And Mills is still a perfectly fine 3rd quarterback for a superflex. And and Fields was worth a lot more. I was able to get Saquon Barkley for Fields. Yeah.
So. And like those things. And I think that there's, again, you talk about like there's value beyond just the production aspect of it. Right. And that's something I've really had to balance with, because the bet that you want to make on Mills isn't necessarily, hey, is he going to finish as a top 12 guy? It's more of like, hey, can he sort of lengthen out my quarterback core? And does him doing that, does him making my quarterback 4 better or my quarterback 3 situation better, whatever situation that he could fit into and sort of make stronger, is that going to allow me roster flexibility to address another issue, right? And like you just said, he makes Justin Fields, whether expendable or usable, in a way that you couldn't have otherwise felt comfortable doing. I think that is a really interesting way to look at this. And again, that's not something I would do at 103, but I think at 303, that makes a lot of sense, right? And when you get to this part of the book, I have the AOD hierarchy of assets, and I talk about like value plays as being a type of asset, but that's further down the board, right? That's kind of like, hey, these guys are guys that could potentially see an uptick in value, or could be potential trade chips in terms of like seeing improving situations or whatever. That's further down the board, but that's kind of what we're talking about in like that later second into the third round pick. And even if they're not producing top 5 finishes, those quarterbacks can definitely extend you out because they can allow you to have additional roster flexibility in a way that, frankly, even a good running back in that range might not do for you.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Theo, where do you want to go?
Do you have any current guys that are sleeper picks that maybe are guys that might go, third round ish, that you're a little higher on than potentially other people right now? And this is, again, before knowing draft landing spots.
Justin Ross.
Ross?
The single best. So in the PFF data, the PFF college era, which I believe goes back to 2013, the single best year for a wide receiver in terms of yards per route run in college was Justin Ross's freshman year. The single best season.
Right.
I can't quit that. And so, and again, I think we think like, if you look at a spreadsheet and it tells you that like, hey, if guys are really good at 18 years old, they have a better chance of hitting in the pros, right? And then you go back and you say, well, he hasn't been good since he was 18 years old. Well, we know that 18-year-old breakout's super impactful. And I could write you a really bad comedy about the errors that have gone on in Justin Ross's last 24 months of his career, including the S show that was happening at quarterback this year, with some of the throws that were going his way. And again, a lot of people like Lawrence, and he was getting thrown to by Lawrence, and now he gets what is an otherwise, like, the Georgia game was unwatchable. And the throws that were going to Justin Ross, I mean, unwatchable. He's getting no help. And, we're going to hold that against him? Or are we going to say, like, hey, at 18 years old, this kid came in and was like one of the best like efficiency seasons we've ever seen? I mean, I think the swing there, again, there's a lot of reasons to think that he might miss, but listen, I will take that swing, because especially if he's going cheap, if he's going to be wide receiver 12 in this class, I don't even take wide receiver swings at wide receiver 12, but give me the guy that has shown something elite like that, and we'll take a swing. Ryan Russillo was talking about this today on the Bill Simmons podcast. I listen to them all the time just because a lot of the stuff from basketball I think applies to Dynasty. And he was basically like, I will be way late to come off of someone that I have seen be elite. And I think that explains Justin Ross, right? I think that the idea of I will be in on, and I will take a shot on someone that I've seen do elite things, even if it's, there's probably only a 33% chance he pans out if he's a third rounder. But I know that I've seen him produce in a way that could be a difference maker. I'm willing to take that swing. And even if that's not a bet that I typically make either. I don't typically make a day 2 wide receiver bet all that often. And he would be one that I would take, assuming that he's in day 2.
Right. And even if he's in day 3, I mean, that's if you're in the, 4th round of your rookie draft or something like that, that's a point where, I'm just going to go ahead.
It's a Diggs situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Diggs basically, I mean, roughly, they look somewhat similar in terms of like the shape of their career. And then you say, like, did we write, and Diggs didn't test that well, and neither Ross. Like, you look back, but you're like, hey, they were good at 18 years old. Right. And listen, it's probably one of those situations like, if I'm taking them at, I don't take a lot of 4th round rookie pick wide receivers, but if I'm taking them at 408, and, just hypothetically, and he sucks as a rookie, like, I can cut him. Where, like, it's clear that he just can't play in the NFL. With whatever limitations, whatever reasons, he just can't cut it, right? He gets caught. Whatever happens, right? That's an early reveal, right? And it's a lotto ticket, right? It's a scratch-off ticket. It shows you really early on that it's not worth anything and you can throw it out. It's not a mutual fund that you have to wait on forever, right? And that's kind of the thing. He's one of those things that if he's going to go on day 3, especially if it's a little bit later, he's going to be a quick reveal, and I don't have a problem with it like way late at the end of the 4th round of rookie draft.
Yeah, perfect. And the other thing is, I mean, a lot of people are concerned about his, his surgery, neck surgery, and all that. But he's proven he can play with it.
Yeah, and we'll know. Like, this is a good example of like the data will tell us, right? Because we'll know, right? Like if he falls out of the draft, we know the neck's a problem, right?
Yes.
Like, this is a really good example we talked about early on. And there's already quotes out here that'll be like, hey, listen, like he was out in 2020 and the situation was terrible in 2021. Grade him by his 2019 tape. I mean, I think that's in the PFF draft guide, or one of the higher profile draft guys has that exact quote from a scout. So I think that we can go back and look at some of that stuff and say, hey, he was good from an early age. We should probably readjust our prior a little bit. And know and follow the rules that they tell us. Like that early career production is better than the late career production, right? Like everyone wants to say that Jameson Williams, like, oh, he wasn't good until he broke out late. Like we should ding him, but won't take the opposite bet, which is like, yeah, the guy was good early, because everyone's in love with the recency. It's a funny conundrum that we put ourselves in sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. Without a doubt. And David Bell is one of those guys for me too. If he goes on day 2, I don't care how fast he ran.
Right.
Yeah. We talked about David Bell last night, Dan. I mean, he went extremely low in our redraft, and we were saying he's a guy that we think in a couple of weeks he could go much, much higher because some team's going to take David Bell. I'm convinced of it. That he was so good, so young, and it just flashes every time you see him, and then he runs slow. But I at the end of the day, I think he's a player.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's get Jordan out of here on just a couple quick questions. I know that we've had some guys that were waiting a while. So, Famous Jay had a question on Adam Thielen. What value to put on older vets like Adam Thielen in Dynasty, and then later he asked Adam Thielen or the 2022 202. Give us your quick thoughts on that, Jordan.
Go check out the Analytics Dynasty draft trade database. It'll have all the trades you could possibly want. We have like 6,000 trade databases, 6,000 leagues, 6,000 plus leagues in there, so you can find all the trades. I think I would hold 202 presently. I think Thielen could be replicated in a lot of ways. I'd look for like a later second. Some of the more recent trades, I saw him for a 2023 second right now. I would take the second side there. Him and Woods for Hopkins. Give me Hopkins. Him for 211 and a future second. Again, I wouldn't do that future second. That's not the way to make this bet. I wouldn't do that. But him in a more of a throw-in aspect of like a J.K. Dobbins trade to. Here's a good one. Like you talk about arbitraging and some of the stuff we talked about earlier. J.K. Dobbins for Josh Jacobs, Jacoby Myers, and Adam Thielen. Like I don't even think Jacoby Myers is all that interesting, but you look at the difference. Why is Dobbins more valuable than Jacobs? I'm not sure. And you're getting Adam Thielen in the process. Like that's a really good trade. Like to me, that's a really like those are the types of trades that you can really pivot down at running back, extract some help at another position. I like that trade a lot because I actually probably think I would have Jacobs over Dobbins.
Right. Yep. Totally makes sense. All right. Mike Williams or the 107?
The 107.
107.
And it's the same thing because like there's a lot of different ways to replicate the Mike Williams. Like there's the difference between, we talked about this earlier, the difference between wide receiver 50 and wide receiver 15 and wide receiver 40. Like you could shake those up in a Yahtzee thing and throw them back out, and it's kind of tough to argue with. And give me the liquid pick, and you could probably make an upgrade at another position and extract a Mike Williams like player, like we just did with Adam Thielen in a bigger trade.
Yeah, I'm taking 107 all day
right.
That one.
Yeah, because you might be surprised about the running back that might haul you down, like or the tight end, like depending on the format, like that 107 might be like Fournette plus, right? Like that 107 could actually get you a heavy hitter where Williams is fine, but he kind of blends in. Like you might be able to get a running back that actually can make a difference. That frankly could be the second best running back in this class.
Right.
And we talk about trade value. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of put a finer point on it, Williams is one of those guys who's not, like a top 10 or so dynasty wide receiver in any way, shape, or form. You probably don't even expect him to be a top 10 scorer in any given year. And at that point, what's the difference between him and the guy who's at, wide receiver 25 or 30 or whatever?
Right.
Like you were talking about earlier, you can kind of put these guys in a blender and, and shake them up and, start pulling them out in any order. And it's probably all right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally, if you're looking to make a second deal off of it, packaging the 107 or the player you draft at 107 with whatever is going to be more valuable than packaging Mike Williams with the second asset. So I think it's a no-brainer.
100%.
Yes. And Famous Jay's wife is asleep, so he's got all night. So sorry, Jordan.
Hey,
you have to stay longer.
You go, Famous Jay.
All right. And then we've got one last one here from I think I've hit all the other ones, but we have one last one from 1912 Fantasy. Sutton for a 23 first.
Sutton's not a top 30 asset. Give me the future first.
Boom. There you go.
The first, I'm taking the first all day for Sutton.
I do like Sutton though. I actually, if we could, let's not go too far on this because I'll get geeky. But if let's put it this way, if Russell Wilson's going to unlock anyone in this offense, it's going to be Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, agree. And again, I think there's different ways to get to Sutton if you want to get to him.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but paying a future for don't speculate at the cost of a future first round pick. That's not how you trade this. Go get an elite player, right?
Yeah, for sure. Get the sure thing, without a doubt. All right, so we're coming up on 2 hours here. So Jordan, I really appreciate you hanging with us. I mean, this has been fantastic. I could go another 2 hours easy. I don't know if Theo could. My
kids are a little young.
Yes, exactly.
I have early mornings, Dan. Early mornings.
How old are your kids?
So right now I have a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 6.5-year-old. So somebody is always up early.
Yes, someone's. Yes.
Yes.
God bless you.
Yes. Yeah. Theo's in the blender right now.
Yes.
That's.
Yep. Absolutely.
Is your youngest out of diapers yet?
My youngest actually, we had on Long Island, we had our break just now from school, and he went full on potty training, and now he's going to school in underwear. So it's a huge accomplishment for him.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a tough one. So we've crossed that bridge and we're there. So we're happy to say.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's got to be a whole nother liberation of your parenthood. So I'm hoping I've got a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So I got some time still with the diapers, but yeah, she's at the point of like, she wants to throw her poop. So, so she literally pooped in her diaper the other day, took it off, stepped in it, and then ran around the house. And I was like, I'm sending you back to where you came from.
That's a tough phase. Tough phase in the McNamara household. Yep.
But she's still probably better than the terrible 4s that the other one's going through.
Yes.
But that's a whole story for another day.
Right. Well, my parents told me they potty trained me and our dog at the same time. So
a 2 for 1. Multitasking again.
They claimed the dog was easier. I think they were probably right.
Yeah.
But those life milestones, those are great, man. I mean, I enjoy every one of them. I mean, I honestly, when my kids were little, I barely remember some of those days, and I go back and look at the videos every once in a while, and it's like, that was great times, without a doubt.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we will work on getting you back to your families here. But again, thank you, Jordan, for coming on and spending all this time with us. We really, really appreciate it. Theo, where do you want to go? What you got for us before we get out of here?
So we have Kevin Scott coming on Wednesday night. We're gonna, if you liked our shows with Jordan and Scott Connor, we'll have Kevin Scott on NFL Draft Eve. We're gonna dive into some prospects and talk about some big picture dynasty concepts. Kevin's a very good dynasty player, very, very good analyst as well. It should be a really, really fun show. And then Dan and I on Friday are going to do a NFFC RotoWire Online Championship draft review with high stakes player Mike Sanda, which should be a lot of fun. Dan and I really like our build. I know Mike likes a lot of things he did in the draft, so we're gonna have a chance to go through a board and kind of get after it. And of course, we'll do a little NFL draft reaction with Mike as well.
Yep, absolutely. So Jordan, one more time, let the people know where they can find you, where they can find all the excellent Analytics at Dynasty content, and anything else you want to do.
Yeah, you can go over to analyticsatdynasty.com and get the book, or go ahead and become a subscriber. We've got our group me chat as well that's constantly going. I've got, I think, 100 messages I got to catch up from what was happening tonight, as well as we've been watching a lot of NBA stuff and trying to apply that to our dynasty teams, which has been somewhat fun. They're very fun. So yeah, you can find all that. Again, I've got Dynasty Daily podcasts. I think I've done 28 so far in the month of April. And we did 388 last year. So I'm looking to smash that. Our draft database, we've got real draft position up as well off of real startup drafts. Got all your data for you. So you can go ahead and check all that out and go ahead and get the book. It'll be that's kind of all your theory applied stuff as well. And I've got a deal going on. I have a breakout adjusted wide receiver matrix. So that way you can look and kind of get an idea of the hit rates for wide receivers based on where they go in the draft, based on where they broke out, when they broke out in college. So that'll help you sort of get a lot of your base rate applications going from the book, and just sort of give it to you in a quick cheat sheet thing for all book subscribers and book purchasers. So you can go ahead and check that out as well.
Nice. Yeah. And let me tell you, I mean, if you haven't figured it out by now, fantasy football is hard.
Yes.
There's a lot going on. I mean, there's a ton of things to keep on top of. We all have busy lives. There's a ton of stuff going on. The more you can outsource it, the better. And Jordan is a perfect person to outsource to. I mean, he does all this work for you. It's virtually free for the, what you get. So seriously, go out, buy the Analytics at Dynasty book. If you haven't done anything else, start with that. Go from there, see where it takes you. Let Jordan do some work for you instead of having to do all that stuff for yourself. All right, and that will do it for us. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate our audience. You guys are the best. The chat was super active tonight. A lot of fun interacting with you guys, and we will check you all later. And now I have to get over to the brand because, of course, I wasn't thinking, and
hit it.
We have to get to the outro.
Go district, the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the and I always be traded. And I always be traded. and I'll always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.